Welcome to Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast with Alexia Leachman, the weekly 9-month podcast to help parents-to-be look forward to their fear-free childbirth. Alexia is a pregnancy and head trash clearance coach and the author of Fear-Free Childbirth, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy and a Positive, Pain-Free Birth. As a mum who's had 2 fear-free and pain-free births, Alexia wants to share with you how she overcame her pregnancy and childbirth fears so that you can look forward to having a fear-free birth too. Over the 9-month life of this podcast, Alexia will be sharing some real-life stories from mums and dads, insights into the latest childbirth research, inspiring tales from birth professionals, and some tips and techniques for clearing your fears and stresses. If you would like to receive a free chapter from her book, then head over to fearfreechildbirth.com, where you can also sign up for her email series, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy. But now, it's time for the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast. This is me, your host, Alexia Leachman, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, on today's show, I'm going to talk about how you can have a stress-free pregnancy. Because if you really want to have a fear-free birth, then you kind of need to try and have a stress-free pregnancy, because a lot of the things that are going to contribute to your fears in childbirth are likely to take root while you're pregnant. And so if you can deal with those during your pregnancy, you'll be in a much better position to be fear-free for the birth. And the thing is, as well, is a lot of the fears are going to be the things that cause you stress in pregnancy. Because let's face it, one of the biggest stresses that you might have while you're pregnant is, oh my goodness, I've got to deal with a birth. And that, for many, actually stresses them out throughout the whole of their pregnancy. So, but of course, there's going to be other things as well that will be stressing you out. And so today, I really want to sort of expand on this whole idea of why you need to have a stress-free pregnancy, why it's important for baby. But I also want to talk about what I believe the 2 main stresses that you encounter in your pregnancy, and really why it's important to understand the difference between these 2 different types of stress. So I'm going to talk about those 2 different types of stresses as well. But then I'm also going to finish off by sharing with you how you can clear your pregnancy stresses. Now, you may or may not know, but I have another podcast called The Head Trash Show. And The Head Trash Show is all about helping you to free your mind of negative thoughts, feelings and emotions. And what underpins all the whole podcast is this technique that I share, which is the head trash clearance method, which helps you to banish stresses and fears from your mind and therefore your life. And so when I talk about how I'm going to help you to clear your stresses, I'll be referring a lot to the work that I talk about as part of my head trash business, and some of that is talked about a lot on the Head Trash Show podcast. So I will be mentioning that again. So if you do hear me talking about clearing head trash or using the head trash clearance method, then the best thing you can do is check out the Head Trash Show podcast and also the Head Trash website at headtrash.co.uk, where you can download for free the 5-step head trash clearance method, which is just utterly brilliant at zapping away and dissolving fears and stresses from your mind and life. Anyway, back to today's show, which is all about how to have a stress-free pregnancy. So, why is it important for you to clear your stress in pregnancy? Well, first off, you'll have a much better pregnancy. You'll be less stressed. Life is much better when you're not so stressed. So that is an obvious one, but it is worth mentioning because we don't always remember to just enjoy life as it is without all that distraction stuff getting in the way. So yes, if you take the time to clear your stresses and reduce them, then life is much sweeter. And that makes life worth the living, right? Now, the second thing, which is really, really important, is the link. There's a known link between the mental and emotional well-being of the mother and the health and emotional well-being of the child. So, a mother who is super stressed, super anxious, that will mean she's more likely to give birth to a child that's got things like hay fever, allergies, asthma, eczema, all that kind of rubbish. Now, this is something that's quite close to my heart because my mum was super stressed when she was pregnant with me, and I was born with all that stuff. I was covered in eczema as a child. I had hay fever. I was allergic to animals, dust, pollen. I mean, you name it, I was allergic to it. And the whole sort of hay fever, asthma, eczema trio is just a nightmare to live with. You get bullied at school, your skin is I'm not going to go on about it, but it's horrid. And that is the last thing I would want for my child. So if this is one thing that really drove me to want to clear my stress in my pregnancy, was that I didn't want my children to be covered in stuff like that. And if there was something that I could possibly do that might mean that they don't get that, then I was going to give it a shot, because it's worth doing that for the sake of the health and well-being of your child. So yeah, there is a known link. There's loads of evidence research out there to say that there is a link between anxious and stressed mothers and the health and well-being of the child when they're born. So for me, that's like a major reason that you should want to do this. Now, the other reason, again, which links back to you having a better time in your pregnancy, is the fact that your hormones are going to go crazy. Mine went, my second pregnancy, my first trimester was a nightmare. My hormones just went off the charts, and my head was not my own. It was awful. One of the reasons I had to put this podcast on hold was the hormones. But the thing about hormones, and what I learned when I was going through that, was that hormones exaggerate your own state of mind. So if you're in a good place, generally, then your hormones, yes, they're going to rock the boat a bit, but you're going to be more able to sort of stay solid in yourself and not be rocked too much by it if you're in a good place. Whereas if there's even an inkling of not a good place showing on any level, then your hormones are they're gonna smell the fear and they're gonna go for you. So you really do not want to give your hormones anything to go for at all. And so that's why it's also really important to try and reduce how you're responding to the stresses in your life, because if you don't, then your hormones are just going to ravage them and turn it into this big, crazy, horrible thing that's going to be really difficult emotionally for you to cope with. And if you're really struggling emotionally because of the hormones, then that's going to really impact on how your body is experiencing that stress, and therefore it's going to have an impact on the baby. So that's why it's also really important, because your hormones are going to magnify whatever emotions you're experiencing. So if you can take the time to reduce the negative ones, then you're going to be reducing the overall damage limitation exercise. That's a nice way of calling it, right? Now, the other thing, which is also quite a biggie actually, is this, and you are improving your chances for a more positive birth experience. And birth experiences, we've all heard, some of them can be pretty shocking, horrific, painful, nightmare, traumatic, all of that stuff. And yes, they can be. However, they don't have to be. It is possible to have an incredibly positive birth experience. And I can say that because I've had 2 incredibly positive birth experiences, but I have worked at it. I have really done a shed load of work to help make that happen. They don't just happen to you. You have to kind of want it and go for it. And I wanted it and I went for it. And positive birth experience for me meant having a pain-free birth experience. And that's what I had. And I put a lot of that down to the fact that I spent my time clearing my stresses and my fears in pregnancy. So when I came to the time of the birth, I had no stress or fear left in my body. There was nothing for adrenaline to hold on to at that point. And so I was able to allow my body to do what it needed to do. So if you do take the time to clear your stresses and your fears in your pregnancy, then when you get to the tail end of it, the thing that you're basically in this for, the birth, then you're more likely to help bring about a more positive birth experience for yourself. Now, I will be doing a separate podcast on positive birth experiences and what I did exactly about reducing the pain in childbirth and some of the really important stuff that you need to understand in order to really make that happen for yourself. But I'm not going to go into that today. So back to stress. So there are 2 types of stresses that I think are really important to think about in pregnancy particularly. And that's this. You've got the sort of stress of the mind, and that's that chitter-chatter stuff. That stuff that kind of takes up your mental space, stops you from sleeping because you're thinking about it, you're mulling it over, all that kind of stuff. And that's really worth putting aside and really trying to quash that. But actually, you do need to do some of that thinking in pregnancy, because your life is about to change forever. If it's your first child, for sure. If it's your second, there are still some massive changes that are going to be coming. And if it's your third, fourth, well, my goodness, you are brave. That's all I can say about people that have that many kids. So yes, there's the chitter chatter bit. So yes, you'll need to, some of the stresses, that you have in pregnancy, and they tend to change throughout your pregnancy. I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the stresses throughout your trimesters a bit later. But essentially, you are trying to figure stuff out, so some of this sort of mental churning is important because your subconscious is trying to figure all this stuff out and find a way through. And so what you find is when you get to a certain point in your pregnancy that, that sort of chitter chat a bit rises for a bit as you try and figure stuff out and wrestle with it and understand it and get used to it, and then it kind of subsides. But the other type of stress that I think is really worth considering or being aware of is the stress on your body. And that is going to be determined by how you're responding to certain situations when you're pregnant. Because when you're stressed, that's when the adrenaline kicks in, when you have that flight or flight response, that the adrenaline kicks in and you've got cortisol running through your veins, and that is the stuff that's damaging for baby. So, yes, you've got that mind chitter chatter stuff, but actually it's the stress within your body that you really need to be trying to keep a lid on. And so changing how you respond to stuff while you're pregnant is really important, because you can reduce the level of adrenaline that's flooding your system, and therefore reduce the adrenaline that goes through the placenta into baby. And so that's the bit that really needs to work on. So, for example, I want to run through some common pregnancy stresses that might be the kind of thing that's going to be affecting you. Now, the biggie for me in your first trimester, sure, you're going to be that shock moment where you're just discovered that you're pregnant. But the biggie in your first trimester is the stress of having a miscarriage, or the fear. If you've had one already, then that's going to be a big one. And obviously, you're going to want to do everything you can to prevent that from happening again, or really avoid it, because a miscarriage is truly horrific. And it's also not pleasant for the guys too. They don't get enough sympathy when they have to go through this stuff, but really, the guys really go through loss as well as the women. So this is something that guys can do too, But the thing about having a miscarriage or fearing a miscarriage is that you can really change how your body is responding to that fear and that stress, because you really want to try and help your body do the best it can at that time. And so you don't want to sort of make that task any harder for it by being in a stressed state. So sure, you can't eliminate the risk of a miscarriage, but what you can do is change how you feel about the risk and how you're responding to that risk. And if you can be in a much more relaxed state, then hopefully you will mitigate that risk. And it's a bit of another damage limitation one, doing everything that you can to make sure that your pregnancy is a successful pregnancy. But then, going on to your second trimester, you're going to have all sorts of stuff. I mean, you're proper pregnant now, your body's going to be changing. So you're probably going to be stressed about your clothes not fitting, having to buy new clothes, how people are now starting to describe your body openly and describe the fact that you look huge. Oh, aren't you big? And all this stuff that you really don't necessarily need to hear, but you are going to hear it. So rather than getting annoyed when you hear that stuff and getting into a bit of a frenzy and tensing your shoulders and, all that kind of response, then if you neutralise those stresses, then you can hear that stuff without having the body response that comes with it. And that's the important thing. It's about getting rid of that stress body response. So yeah, you've got all that stuff about, and then you've got your working life. My God, your working life's going to be turned upside down. Are you going to have to stop work? Are you going to have to be a stay-at-home mum? Are you going to have to go part-time? You've got to tell the people at work. How are people going to take it at work? What's going to happen to your job? What about money? There's all that stuff that's going to be going through your head in your second trimester as you kind of get to grips with your pregnancy, and as you've probably made through from that, the miscarriage thing's now faded away. Now it's all that practical stuff. You're like, this is really happening. Oh my God, how am I going to cope? So there's all that stuff that kicks in. But then the final trimester, this is when there's some really juicy stresses and fears that kick in at this stage. And most namely, your mind starts focusing on the due date and the birth. And my goodness, there's a whole heap of stresses and fears lumped into that, let me tell you. So yeah, again, how you feel about the birth, any fears you have around the birth, this is all stuff that you really need to write down and start clearing. And of course, I'm going to say this, if you haven't been listening to the podcast before, this podcast is all about helping you to make the best out of our 5-step process and to clear the stresses and fears in your life so that you can live awesomely, be happy, be content, be focused, determined, productive, all those great things that you can be when your mind isn't full of crap. So, when it comes to pregnancy, what is an awesome version of pregnancy? Well, an awesome version of pregnancy is being stress-free and having a positive birth experience. That's the kind of if you can come out having an amazing pregnancy, an amazing birth experience, then you are going to feel like you're on fire when you are a mum. You're going to be loaded with confidence, loaded with, you're going to be feeling empowered about the birth. You're probably going to avoid things like postnatal depression, because that affects, more likely to affect you if you've had a negative birth experience, a traumatic birth experience, if you've been super stressed during a pregnancy. And if you've got postnatal depression, then that's not going to do great stuff for your mothering, the child, parenting, all that stuff. Really by focusing on taking the time to get yourself into a really great mental state during your pregnancy can really give you, my goodness, the benefits are just so far-reaching. It's incredible, just for you in terms of protecting your future mental health and well-being by potentially avoiding things like postnatal depression, but also by giving your little one the best start in life by hopefully avoiding some of the nightmare things that they could get as a result of you being stressed. So, working on this stuff is really, really important. And so when you think about what is stressing you in your pregnancy, what are your fears, write them down, create your own pregnancy head trash clearance to-do list and work on this stuff, because it's worth clearing and it is worth making the effort to do so. It really is super important. And the thing is, I want to sort of really also share with you that this stuff works. This is exactly what I did throughout my pregnancy. I did this throughout my first pregnancy. I basically mapped out every single fear and stress that I had. And my goodness, I was drowning under my fears and stress at that point. This is, I was still very much somebody that was completely full of head trash. I'm not fully free of head trash right now, let me tell you, because loads of new stuff keeps piling in all the time. But my goodness, I was in a proper stress state. And I was very methodical about this. I'd write it all out and I'd clear my stuff one by one. And eventually, I got to a place where I was able to have a pain-free birth experience at home that was a very, very quick birth. And I never thought for a minute that would be possible for me. I was lining myself up to have every single drug under the sun for my birth experience in a hospital, surrounded by every medic concerned. I never thought in a million years that I'd be able to do that at home without drugs in in under 6 hours. So this is something that really does work. This is exactly what I did. So this is what you need to do. Write down everything that stresses you out during your pregnancy. Seriously, write it down in a list. On your phone, if you woke up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep, what's keeping you up? Get your phone out, write it on your phone. Keep a little list. I've got on my iPhone, I use the Notes app, and that's my never-ending head trash list. So just start your pregnancy list and write it down. And then put some time aside every day, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and clear something. I would always clear my stuff last thing at night. I could never get to sleep easily when I was pregnant because I was just so uncomfortable sleeping. After a certain time, you can't sleep on your back. You've got to sleep on your side. There's so many things that were stopping me getting sleep, having to get up for a wee, all this kind of stuff. So the night is a really great time to clear some of your head trash. And also because it doesn't make a noise, you can do that while your other half is sleeping next to you. And it really helps you to get to sleep because it calms your body and it calms your mind. So it's helping me to get to sleep in that moment. And that is what you need to do. And you need to stick to it. And that is it. That is how you have a stress-free pregnancy. If you have any questions at all about this, then do get in touch with me. Email me with your questions, specifically asking me what more if you want to know how to have that positive birth experience, how to have a stress-free pregnancy. If there's anything that you haven't fully understood, then please let me know. Email me and let me know what your questions are, and I will do everything I can to help you. You can email me at alexia@fearfreechildbirth.com. So don't hesitate to get in touch with any questions whatsoever, and I will do my best to get back to you. Now, if you're interested in finding out more about how to have a stress-free pregnancy, I do have a free email series on how to have a stress-free pregnancy. So you just have to sign up at the fearfreechildbirth.com website, and you will get a bunch of emails right into your inbox telling you everything that I think you need to know to have a stress-free pregnancy. So some of the stuff I include in the email series are things like how to avoid due date stress. I bet you didn't know there was due date stress, but yes, there is. And the emails tell you how to avoid it. But also the 3 things you need to know about pain so that you can banish pain and at least have it not present when you're giving birth, because you don't really want to have pain there on the day. So, to me, I think those are 2 great reasons already. There's a lot of stuff I've put in that email series that's actually some of the stuff I'm putting in the book, and I'm probably doing myself out of book sales, but hey, I'd rather get this stuff out there so that you can enjoy a fear-free birth. So sign up at the fearfreechildbirth.com website. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman from the Fear-Free Childbirth podcast. If you enjoyed the show, she'd really love it if you left a review on iTunes or Stitcher or shared it with a friend. And don't forget, to get a free chapter from her book, head over to fearfreechildbirth.com to get your copy, as well as finding other episodes in this podcast and more about how Alexia can help you with pregnancy and birth preparation coaching. Until next time.